Police in New York are using the latest surveillance technology to track down their suspect. Some similar resources are working right here in our area. Our investigative reporter Terry Parker has a closer look at the tools being used in our area. Terry?
Todd, police in New York do have the most sophisticated camera and facial recognition software systems there are. And you can see how quickly they were able to hone in on a possible suspect, releasing those pictures today. Local police also use much of the same technology to solve crimes here. Here's how it works. Police first use surveillance cameras to see the actual shooting of Brian Thompson, and then they turn to the hundreds of other cameras along that Manhattan street to see the suspect running from the crime scene, then getting on an e-bike and pedaling away into Central Park. They quickly found images from a nearby Starbucks that showed him more closely, still wearing a mask though. That's when police can turn to facial recognition software. All police departments have it, even here. They put in a picture and the software scans through driver's license pictures and mugshots to see if there is a match. Retired FBI agent John McVeigh tells me it's incredibly helpful, but police also have to use old-fashioned methods too.
They're going to run through those. And you know, look, you see people all the time that kind of look alike, you know, same kind of facial features, but, you know, the computer program may be able to limit it down because, you know, this person's got a mark here or their eye's a little different. But you're still going to, you know, even with the facial recognition, especially if half the face is shown, I couldn't even imagine how many people it's going to pull out.
Police got a hit another way. Someone recognized a Starbucks photo and reportedly called police with a tip that the same guy had been staying at a nearby hostel. And that's where they discovered the new pictures of what seems to be the same man with no mask, making it now easier to identify him through tips or facial recognition. McVeigh says police are going through also hundreds of surveillance camera clips, trying to find out more about where the suspect came from before the murder and then where he went. And they're also combing through records of people who made complaints against United Healthcare, as police suspect the killer might have had a grudge based on denial of coverage by the insurance company giant.
This is the Nation's Conspire channel. Welcome to today's show. When I first did a video about this United Healthcare CEO being quote unquote executed in the streets, I talked about the infrastructure change that is coming with the AI healthcare system. But since I've done that video, there's been more that has come out in regards to the story. And of course, as they always do, there's numerous agendas tied into everything. And somehow, some way, even with a picture of this guy's face, the police are having a tough time, of course, finding the guy who supposedly pulled the trigger. But don't worry, have no fear, because a hero is here. And who is the hero that's going to find this man that's on the loose? Well, it's facial recognition, because the hero, of course, is modern technology. So even with the photo of the guy, even with the guy on an e-bike, even with him being reportedly seen around town and getting on and off certain buses, well, we need facial recognition to find him. And then, of course, facial recognition to save the day. Because if you're not paying attention, there's a reason that the police are being victimized, so to speak, in the United States of America. There's a reason that people have turned on the police. There's a reason that they created all of these false flags and psyops around the police department, convincing everybody out there that policemen were pulling people over because of the color of their skin and had such horrible self-awareness that they were abusing people of the opposite skin color without obviously paying attention to all the stories that were out there. Because if you were paying attention to the stories that were out there, if you were a police officer, you'd be extra careful because you knew if you said something wrong or did something wrong that you might be looked at as a racist. But no, the police just continued to do it and continued to do it. And then, of course, the public perception of the police has turned into people absolutely loathing and hating the police. Now, I've covered the police, of course, being a part of the Fraternal Order of Police, which is a Masonic organization. All these things run through Freemasonry, so all these psyops are very easy to create with the police. So what I'm getting at is that eventually there are no police, because everything, of course, will be policed through surveillance, a surveillance state. Everything will be done through all these AI robo-dogs and all these AI robo-cops that New York City has put in their subways, that Los Angeles has put on their streets. This is all strategically being done. And the fact that they haven't apprehended this guy in a few days makes you start looking at the stories, right? And every single story, of course, has every single solution in it, because this is problem, reaction, solution 101. And once this guy is apprehended, they will applaud facial recognition. In fact, they will talk about how, well, there's facial recognition in New York, and if we had better systems, say like China has, they could have apprehended him a lot faster. They could have got to him quicker. And of course, that's New York City. What about all these other regions that are not cities, like suburbia, that don't have this type of technology? Imagine if it was done outside of his home. Well, thankfully, people are already putting up their own devices on their home and creating a surveillance state for the government by putting their Ring, by putting all of these things on their own property so that the government could just access their cameras and, of course, solve crimes. But that's not what this is really about. It's about a surveillance state. It's about monitoring and tracking you 24/7. And the blueprint, as I've said over and over and over again, for global communism is China. China is hell on earth. And the fact that we're talking about some of these stories getting solved by CCTV and facial recognition and nobody's blinking, nobody cares, shows you how desensitized people have become to this. And that's because once they tell you 10 years ago about facial recognition technology, you start, when you first hear the story, you say, like Minority Report, whoa, that's crazy. That's insane. We can't have that. And then little by little, all the stories you hear are about how murders and all these crimes are being solved because of it. And people start going, well, you know, that's pretty good, right? Just like how the government wants your DNA. So what do? Well, they tell you that, hey, if everybody submitted their DNA, we could solve these crimes a lot faster, right? And what do people want now? People want everybody to have to submit their DNA, kind of like they have to do in China. And now we even see facial recognition in these cameras, even at checkout monitors in stores like Walgreens and CVS and Walmart. And people are so desensitized, they don't even care because they use the mindset of what a sheeple does. You know, sheeple is a sheeple does. And what does the sheeple say when it comes to privacy? They say, I'm not hiding anything from anyone. Well, of course, you're not hiding anything from anyone yet. But of course, when the government starts saying and doing things that oppress you and start bothering you because you're not being cooperative enough, then all of a sudden you'll realize that you made a mistake by giving up your privacy. But of course, the government's pretending to be here to help, to be here to be your friend. And all these suckers, all these sheeple out there who want a surveillance state, who say things like, I'm not hiding anything, are completely clueless to what it looks like. In China, ladies and gentlemen, they have their own grid system, systematic surveillance of its citizens. Neighborhoods and regions have been divided into grids. Residents of the grids have been recruited to go door to door, inspecting the living spaces in houses, reporting their findings to authorities, being tattletales. China's birth certificates now include parents' facial data. And of course, like I said earlier, mass DNA collections being done in China. In fact, the surveillance cameras are so equipped in China that they can see you sneeze 4,000 feet away. If you don't know what a surveillance state looks like, well, let's start here and take a look at the hell on earth that is China, because this is what they want to implement in America. And when stories like this come out and you hear about how it's solved via facial recognition, you're going to want more because you're saying that's great technology to our benefit, right? Kind of like they're doing with all the true crime shows and why they've become so popular. Every single story is solved by one of two things: a CCTV camera or, wait for it, DNA. And what does that make people out there want? People to have to submit their DNA so these cases can be solved quicker and more efficiently, right? Here's what China looks like, ladies and gentlemen.
China's pursuing an ambitious plan to create an omnipresent video surveillance network. The Shuiliang or Sharp Eyes project aims to extend and integrate video surveillance from cities into villages and from roads into residential compounds. It aims to use artificial intelligence, big data and deep learning to analyze this mountain of video evidence, to work out who's doing what, where and when, to track suspects and the people they associate with, and even to predict crime. In November, I visited 3 tech companies in the cities of Beijing and Chongqing to see how China plans to make the communist slogan, "The masses have sharp eyes," into a reality. Here are a few of the ideas that the tech companies showcased. These cameras are looking at a road junction, and they're identifying everything that's passing through. They're looking at cars, reading the number plates, and they're looking at pedestrians, classifying pedestrians according to their age, their gender, what kind of clothes they're wearing, even what kind of hairstyles they have. This software analyzes crowds. It's producing a heat map of where people are massing together, the sort of thing you might use to prevent overcrowding. You can also see that it's also able to track individuals through the crowd. So if you're looking for a suspect, this is the kind of software you might want to use. Here we can see two cameras picking faces out of the crowd, comparing those faces to a national database of suspects, of wanted men and women. The police then look at the matches that are flagged and see whether they think that's someone they're looking for. They can then swoop in to potentially arrest or question the person that the cameras have identified. A completely different application now. This camera is trained on the face of a truck driver. It's looking at his facial expressions and what he's doing to see whether he's showing any signs of tiredness. If the score rises above a certain level, then he's seen as too tired to drive. His company will be alerted, they'll give him a call and tell him to take a rest. The Sharp Eyes project has already been rolled out in more than 50 cities. So far, the tech doesn't quite match the ambition, but experts agree that facial recognition is improving fast and is a technology of the future,
turning the region into a laboratory for new surveillance technology. ID cards loaded with personal details are used to track people's movements. Residents have different levels of freedom based on factors like ethnicity and religious practices. Goods that are deemed dangerous are tightly controlled. If you want to buy a knife in this cutlery shop, for example, the purchase is tied to your ID, as this salesman demonstrates.
这个叫二维码，这个叫二维码编号，然后直接雕刻能激光刻上就可以了。就是一个身份证画面上面，然后一读卡，这个叫身份证照片、身份证号码，然后民族、家庭住址都有了，然后生成一个二维码。
The system also tracks faces. An immense network of security cameras, some equipped with facial recognition, is constantly monitoring the streets. Facial recognition systems are also used to match people with their ID cards, everywhere from shopping malls to gas stations. Authorities use artificial intelligence that can alert them if someone in a video is walking too fast or parked in the wrong spot. The government has also massively increased human surveillance. It has recruited 6 times more policemen this year than it did in 2015. Cities are now dotted with brand new police booths, one every couple hundred yards in some Uyghur neighborhoods.
Every Uyghur over 12 years old is forced to surrender their biometric data, including voice, blood, DNA samples, and iris scans.
And of course, if you think that that's bad, well, it's worse. Yes, believe it or not, it's worse in China. I've covered this a lot over the years, and I've talked about the social score. And people have been conditioned into a social score via a lot of these apps that give you scores, a lot of these games that people play on their phones, your credit score, where you have to be a good citizen with your credit card, make sure you pay your debts, you get a higher credit score, then you can get more credit. This has all been designed for the social score, okay? If you don't know how the social score actually works, here, let me show you.
Everywhere she goes, Ouyang Haoyu is followed. What she buys, how she behaves, is tracked and scored to show how responsible and trustworthy she is. It's called the social credit system, and in one version now being tested, a person's reputation is scored on a scale of 350 to 950. And Haoyu, with a good score of 752, is okay with it. In fact, most people are.
It's a mechanism like pushes you to become a better citizen.
It's big data meets Big Brother, expanding how the government monitors, understands, and ultimately controls its 1.4 billion citizens. Thanks to advances in artificial intelligence and facial recognition, and a web of more than 200 million surveillance cameras.
Are people bothered by privacy concerns?
We think a lot of camera
keep the safety is really good. We can accept it.
Companies are experimenting with the algorithms to help the government create the new national social credit system. The government also has pilot projects. In one, citizens are required to do hours of unpaid work to get benefits. And scores are docked for things like littering, a messy yard, gossip, even jaywalking. Video of offenders is shown on the local news. And information collectors like Zhou Aini are paid to report on their neighbors. Her quota, 10 entries a month. Like the man who carried a drunk person home. A good deed, she says. Good social credit gets rewarded with perks like cheap loans and travel deals. But a bad score means public shame and worse. Huang Huijun lost a court case and didn't pay. Now he's on a government blacklist. I can't buy airplane or train tickets, he says, and the list goes on. Being discredited makes it hard to get a job or put kids in top schools. The social credit system will go nationwide next year, and few here are willing to criticize it. Something that may pose a risk itself for a bad score and the life that comes with it.
So we are building our own surveillance prison. Somehow the government, the police, they've been allowed to have facial recognition. They're allowing facial recognition in stadiums. They're using more and more facial recognition. Of course, we saw during the outbreak, which served multiple purposes, of course, to get people into their technology and out of the real world so that more and more people would do Zooms and FaceTimes. More and more people, when they did go out, were okay with getting their face scanned and their temperature taken everywhere they went because they were just happy that they were let out of their house for a few hours so they can have what really was nothing more than a prisoner getting an hour of recess time because most stores were only open for a few hours and people were willingly allowing stores to take their temperatures, hotels, you name it. Hospitals couldn't go in without temperature taken, a test taken. This is the stripping of civilian rights happening all around us. And if you think that Donald Trump is going to stop this from happening, think again. He's the perfect character that's been created to bring this in because the Democrats deliberately acted like buffoons and fools for years and years and years to make even Democratic voters irate about the rising crime, about the stuff they were seeing on the news because they look at the news and perceive it as the real world and reality and don't realize that it's a simulation. So then they're just begging for somebody to do something about all the crime they see on the news because it makes them fearful to go outside. And little by little, the government says, well, we're not going to do anything about it. We're Democrats. We're going to continue to make it absolutely chaotic. And then Donald Trump gets put in. And Donald Trump says, we're going to clean it all up. And everybody cheers and they say, yes, clean it up. He says, we're going to stop all of this stuff with the border, because the government's been deliberately allowing people to cross the border. Well, we're going to stop it. We're going to get a digital ID in place. Oh, we're going to get a digital ID. Great. Then we can monitor who's a real American civilian and who isn't, right? Oh, wait, don't think about all the other things that come with a digital ID. Having everything in one wallet, in an e-wallet, a little digital ID. Oh, right. And then from there, it's more and more of your rights and your privacy stripped and given to Big Brother. And from there, when you start seeing things like Mar-a-Lago, where Trump literally has a robo-dog patrolling Mar-a-Lago, you should start saying, wait a minute, what is that whole deal with the World Economic Forum about? That old bald guy looks like Dr. Evil? I always hear the alt-right media shills talking about him. They're talking about how he wants us to eat bugs, right? But what's he really talking about? He's talking about AI governance. So the more you see Donald Trump aligned with technology, then you should start realizing that he's actually implementing this surveillance state, that he's actually going to bring this about, AI governance. And that's why Elon Musk is standing right by his side. It's amazing how dumbed down people have become that some tech giant, some billionaire like Elon Musk is now going everywhere with Donald Trump. We've never seen something like this before. We've never seen Ronald Reagan side by side with some giant tech company guy going to dinner, showing us everywhere they go, best buddies, having his mother come on TV talking about them like they're 17-year-olds in the middle of a bromance, right? Because who's going to bring about this AI governance? Well, Donald Trump side by side with the man who is supposed to clean up the government with government efficiency. Well, what's more efficient than having artificial intelligence installed in your government? And then, ladies and gentlemen, you have China in America, Of course, without you realizing it until it's too late. And people will be clamoring for it because they're obsessed with their technology. Democrats and Republicans alike will see this as a win-win. And Republicans will turn a blind eye to it because they're just happy they don't have to hear stories about men playing women's sports anymore. Because Donald Trump's president, we have to worry about pronouns in the military. Those are the things that seem to excite them. Things that shouldn't even be discussed as issues. The fact that we were discussing these things and the alt-right media continue to talk about it every single day, make documentaries about what's a man, what's a woman, have Congress debate these things. These aren't even things that are up for debate, okay? These aren't things that are up for debate. These aren't things we should be focusing attention on because they're so ridiculous. These are things that people should be put in insane asylums for, right? That's what an insane asylum is for. But instead, they got so gaslit by all of that stuff that they're just thrilled to hear these little stories about how all of a sudden IRS is going to be audited. Yeah, let's go after the IRS, as if they're not going to pay taxes anymore. As all these stories about, oh, we're going to remove woke. We're going to make sure that this pronoun stuff in the military gets thrown out. These people are cheering, and not paying attention to what they're trying to install, which is AI governance. And that's Musk's role with Donald Trump. It goes to a surveillance state. Then it goes to a social score. And if you're a Democrat out there, you should be extra concerned because if that happens with Trump in power, well, your credit score is not going to be high. And we know, of course, that the people with Democrat mindsets always like to appease Big Brother and be good citizens and wear their masks and tell everybody to do the right thing. Well, the things that they think are the right thing won't be the right thing with Donald Trump in power and vice versa, right? So people are going to have to change their behavior. And I guess when Larry Fink said what they're trying to do is behavioral control, the end game for that is a social credit score. So the assailant is still out there, ladies and gentlemen. Of course, he's probably hiding at CIA headquarters, or in fact, he's probably over with the Mossad in Israel right now, because obviously they're not really trying to find this guy, because this guy is not going to be arrested and put in jail. And even if they put on a sham of a trial so they can build up angst about the health insurance industry, which is very likely, most of the time these assailants don't live to tell a tale, right? But this seems like one of those stories he will live to tell the tale, because he could talk about how he was denied coverage. Maybe he's on his deathbed and he went and did that because they wouldn't give him coverage and now it's too late for him and he's going to die. Or maybe he wanted gender affirming care and they denied him of that so they can gaslight the Republicans and Democrats to care about a ridiculous man-made story like this that the government has manufactured to begin changing the healthcare structure. But if they wanted to get him, they could get him. They clearly don't want to get him. And in fact, they're taking their time so that they could tell you who the real hero is in this entire story. And that is facial recognition and technology, because technology is going to continue to be praised as the hero for solving crimes, for saving lives, for helping people figure out problems that we would never be able to figure out without technology. And of course, these people won't realize it till it's too late when they're entrapped by their technology. But I guess you could say they already are if you look around. Most of these people walking around, looking at their phone, go anywhere and sit. Any waiting room, anywhere. Every person in there's doing what? Looking at their phone. They've got you obsessed. They've got you hooked. It's the worst addiction we've ever seen ever of anything in the history of humanity, because every single person is addicted. And of course, they look at it like, well, this is a great thing because you can get all your answers here, because the government's dumbed you down so much that you don't know any answers. But thankfully, you could Google them. And what would you do without that? Well, you probably just walk off a cliff, right? Because you wouldn't know left from right without your technology or your phone in your hand. Ladies and gentlemen, we are on the cusp of a surveillance state brought to you by the Conservative Party, who's working, of course, with the World Economic Forum to bring about artificial intelligence governance. I thank everybody for being here. Hope you're all doing well. God bless you and your families as always.